Hello there, everyone. My name is Shiv. I am the outcomes engineer over at Outco, right? Actually, I attended Outco myself, right? While I attended Outco, upon completion, I actually got an offer from IBM, worked there, and then I realized I enjoy talking to people a lot more. So now I'm here at Outco, and I'm joined here with Sergey. Sergey, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for us?
How's it going, everyone? I'm Sergey. So I'm also a former outcoder, way back, class 11. Currently working at Google, doing a mix of software engineering and sort of like business development. And so before that, I was actually working at Outco too. So I went through the program and then worked as a software engineer and as an instructor. So I helped build a lot of the curriculum around it, what people are currently learning. And yeah, before that, my background wasn't in coding. I actually came into that from, I studied biology and economics at UC Berkeley. So I kind of transitioned into coding a little bit later. But Alco was a big part of that. And yeah, just happy to be speaking today.
Wonderful, thank you. And before we continue, I just want to shout out our partners, New Tech Northwest, one of the fastest growing tech communities in the Pacific Northwest, right? They have over 53,000 folks, friends, they're building relationships. So definitely go ahead, check them out. We'll drop a link in the chat. And just to get a feel for the community that's in here right now, why don't you all go ahead, type out where you're calling in from. I'm actually calling in from Corona, California, not to be confused with the virus. Please don't, hate on my city. I know I didn't name it. So yeah, go ahead, type out. Cool. Seattle, San Jose, ooh, Columbus, Seattle. Wonderful. Ooh, a lot of people from Seattle. All righty. So we got San Francisco, of course, North Carolina, Austin, great. Listen, Texas, great state, great state. New York, Canada, welcome from Canada. Of course, Boston, Seattle, Brooklyn, Waterloo. Wonderful. Thank you all. I appreciate you all for taking your evening, joining us, me and Sergey. Sergey, you ready to kick things off?
Yeah, let's do
Wonderful.
it.
Also, actually, before that, if you have questions, make sure to type them in the Q&A just so we can have things separated. If you just want to joke around, that's what the chat room's for. So, Sergey, right off the bat, how do you get better at problem solving?
Sure. Yeah. So, I think there's a lot of good resources out there. I mean, I think nothing beats like practice. And if people actually, do people have access to the medium that we have? Medium.com/outco. So that's our blog. We have a whole blog post that I wrote about problem solving. So if you really want a deep dive, it's like a 30-minute read. Yeah, I think if I wanted to sum it up in like one major point, like the number one thing, I would say it's try to find ways to teach others. So try to find ways to teach other people. And yeah, it kind of, there's a few reasons for that. I mean, first of all, I think that's how I got better at coding and problem solving in general, was through working at Outco and using like those opportunities to kind of teach people and have that repetition, and teach various cohorts. It really gave me the chance to kind of get better at things. But you don't need to, work as an instructor to do that. You could just be, in the program or even just pairing with people who are also interested in coding. Because, you need to know the problem that you've solved. And, if you've gone through the roadblocks, you've had to kind of do some research and investigate like what works and what doesn't. And then two, in that teaching process, you really get to see how other people think. You get to see someone else try to solve it, and you can kind of see what the common mistakes are. It kind of acts as a mirror. Plus, I can't stress enough, like the communication skills, like teaching something and really like knowing it versus putting it into words and explaining it to someone else. It's a huge difference. And I think like that's a big piece of the interview process is because you're up there on a whiteboard or in a text screen, you really gotta like learn how to convey what you're thinking in the moment on the spot to the interviewer. And the best way to do that is by trying to teach people problems. So, I mean, I think one way to do that is everyone kind of picks a problem, maybe in a group or like in pairs, and you do that problem, you come back the next day and you teach it to each other. It's a great way I've seen kind of working. And then two, like there's that community aspect. Like you're part of the Outco community when you join, and you want to make those good connections because, even when I was interviewing after Outco, one of my interviewers happened to be a former student, right? So Silicon Valley is a very small place, and it pays to be, a part of that community and have friends and make connections, right? You don't exist in a vacuum. You're going to have teammates, you're going to have coworkers, and, I think like helping someone out, helping them through a problem, maybe like a roadblock that they have, it's just good karma.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you for that. So, you're talking about building this community. How do you create a system of support, for for success, right? How do you find these people? During Alco, of course, we have a bunch of people that we're able to get like that work with us, that are, fortunately our alumni are really good with helping each other. They're always posting their own jobs and things of that nature. But, what do you recommend on how to find those people that are really willing to help you and look out for your success?
Yeah, yeah, great question. Yeah, when I think of like systems to kind of learn or get better, I think of it as sort of like layers, right? So the outermost layer would be what's the environment you're in. At Outco, obviously it is literally what it sounds like. You have the whiteboards, you have markers and laptops and projectors, and tools to kind of teach. Obviously now Outco is closed, right? Like most places, but you have the online environment. So, you want to make sure your environment though it has the things you need, right? So it has, if you need a monitor or if you need a laptop stand or standing desk, or if you need some kind of like tool to like whiteboard, like an iPad or something, make sure you have those things. But it's also beyond that, right? It's having the fellow students around you, right? It's having the Slack channels. It's having the things that support your learning, like the physical things that you need, right? The next layer beyond that, though, is like what are the behaviors in that environment, right? I mean, like your environment might be now it's probably at home for everyone, right? And you need things like snacks and things to kind of keep you going. But how are you actually spending that time? Are you actually putting in a certain number of hours coding? It could be even 30 minutes a day, an hour, whatever. But are you actually putting in that time? Are you actually going through the motions? Even if you have a bad day and you couldn't get through any of the problems, are you at least doing it? Because it's really just, it's cumulative. It adds up over time. You got to be sending out the applications. You got to actually be working on side projects, doing interviews, taking calls. And then outside of the job search, there's the question of, are you taking care of yourself, eating right, sleeping enough, getting enough exercise, taking breaks, and doing activities that kind of help you take your mind off the coding and the stress of the job search, right? So there's all those like behaviors, right? So you have the environment, behaviors, and then sort of like the innermost layer would be what are your sort of skills or capabilities? And so these are the actual like new things that you're learning, the new things that you're building. So, you might spend an hour a day coding every day, right? But if you're working on the same problems or same types of problems, right, really like easy ones, and you're not pushing yourself, if you're not trying to learn new topics like can you solve recursion problems? Can you solve graph problems or tree problems or dynamic programming problems? Do you know all the right frameworks for the jobs that you're going for, or the right programming languages? What kind of projects or apps have you built that really like push your skills, right? So you may not necessarily need to use all of them on a particular interview, but you also want to grow that set of capabilities, right? So, and then two, it's knowing how to actually write a good reverse recruiting message. It's knowing how to craft a good email. Do you know how to network properly? Do you know how to like eat healthy and take care of yourself? And and a big one that for me a long time was just kind of blind spot. But do you know how to rest? Right? You know how to recharge. Right? Sometimes it's not about knowing. It's not about trying to get less work. It's knowing about how to recharge so you can take on more. And I guess if there was like an innermost layer, it's really just believing in yourself, right? So if you have your environment, your behaviors, capabilities, then it's your beliefs. It's knowing and feeling like you can do it. Sometimes I struggle, obviously, with imposter syndrome. I think like most people, especially in tech, because it's a challenging field to be in. But I think the biggest part is like you have to be, kind to yourself, and you have to actually believe that you can put in the time and that you will learn what you need to learn, right? And I can speak from experience, right? I came in not really knowing how to code out of college, having studied something completely different, and now that's the industry that I'm in. So you got to believe that you can do it. And I think the biggest piece of advice I can give there is talk to someone if you're feeling insecure about something. It could be anyone, but ideally someone you trust, because just putting things into words helps things go from like a feeling to something concrete, something defined that you can then address. Because if you can't name something, if you can't, I think there's a quote from Yoda in Star Wars. He's like, you have to name your fears before you can banish them. Obviously he said that in a Yoda kind of way, but yeah, you got to put your problems into words before you can solve them. So.
Definitely. Thank you for that. And, we definitely do have a question. And I would love to answer this first, just to give you a little break from talking. But Vivian asks, can we talk about the program experience or our backgrounds and how hard it was to get through Outco? She's just trying to understand about what the experience was like for someone brand new to this. Well, Vivian, that's a great question. So, like I said, I'll go first. My experience, my college degree was in political science, law, and society. I thought I was going to go become a lawyer for the military, a judge advocate general. Realized, I don't want to go to law. So my sister-in-law actually got me into software engineering. So I'm self-taught, went to a code school. Right after that, I actually started teaching web development inside prison, helping with rehabilitation. So, that was a lot of fun, very rewarding. When I started looking for work after that, because I wanted to break into the tech industry, what ended up happening was I got hit with a lot of, hey, that's really cool with what you're doing, but you don't have real experience. You're not hands-on. So it took me actually 2 tries to get into Outco. I didn't know data structures beforehand, which is why it did take me 2 tries. But the coaches were really good. They gave a lot of feedback the first time I didn't get in. So then that's what I prepared for. That's what I studied. So I got in. Now going through Outco, just having them revamp my resume, that changed everything, right? I instantly started getting more hits. More people wanted to interview me, got more phone calls, right? And then it was all about how I sell myself, right? One thing I've learned is I did have the experience, right? It was just in a different format. So once I learned how to actually talk about my experience, I was able to move through those interviews. Once I got to the whiteboarding, right, this was a daunting task. And Sergey was actually one of my head coaches. So a lot of help from Sergey there. But, just being able to break down and understanding fully what I'm looking at, right? I was brand new to these data structures algorithms because, as I mentioned, I was self-taught, went to a code school. We don't cover those things. So, breaking down these data structures and putting in the time and effort, right? You definitely need to put in that time and effort. As Sergey was mentioning, you have to push yourself to those uncomfortable levels, right? So I would spend, I know folks would spend 5 hours a week outside of class. I personally would spend around 20, just because I really wanted to hammer away and do well. I really wanted to get into the tech industry, right? And then of course negotiation, right? So you learn all these things. Negotiation was probably one of the most uncomfortable things, just because I don't know about you, but I personally don't like saying like, hey, I want a little bit more money. Although we all should say that, right? We're all worth it. Why not? So upon completion, right, I started applying. And one thing about Outco that really got me was when I get flustered, I spiral downhill, right? So I got flustered on one of my first interviews, went downhill, right? It wasn't because I didn't know it. I just got nervous, right? And Outco gives these weekly feedback forms of like, hey, how you doing? And I was like, hey, I'm pretty bummed out. I had a coach actually give me a call and, walk me through that pain point so it never happened again. Ultimately interviewed at IBM, got that job, loved it, but yeah, just liked working with people. So it definitely is challenging depending on where you're at. We have folks of all levels, right? We have new engineers all the way to like senior engineers with like 20, 30 years of experience. I've even seen folks from FANG companies come through. So a wide range. Also starting to see a lot more managers, more director level folks. So we do have a wide range and you get a lot of experience. So Sergey, could you share with us, your experience going through Outco, and because you are also a coach on the technical side, what are some things you see? What are some struggles you see, and the breaking points where they break through and get that wow moment?
Mhm. Yeah. Like I mentioned, I think the biggest learning thing for me was the sort of teaching, right? Like teaching, I thought was a big way for me to actually learn the material. Um, I think what one I had a coworker, she's no longer with Outco, but she had a great saying that when you're teaching someone, you have to meet them where they are. Um, so what one big kind of aha moment for myself was kind of realizing um, I needed to, whenever I was trying to teach someone one on one, or kind of when we were going around the room and teaching people on the whiteboards, it was trying to figure out my job as a teacher wasn't just to kind of one way, like it wasn't a one way sort of communication. It wasn't saying this is what you need to do, this is how you need to do it. It was sort of like a two-way back and forth where I was sort of searching for what was the missing link, like what was the missing, what was the pain point, or what was the key piece of information that maybe someone wasn't seeing. And sometimes it's about diagramming something the right way. Sometimes it's about showing a certain way to kind of work through a problem, right? I mean, a lot of times people get stuck in dead ends, and you kind of have to help people like work through it and like take steps back and say, okay, like let's start over, let's kind of go at it again. I think a big piece of it is asking the right questions, right? As the instructor, you kind of need to ask, okay, well, what does this piece mean, or what does this piece do? It's a skill, just knowing what the right questions are to ask. And then as the interviewee, like it works both ways, right? I think you got to ask for feedback on the questions. You got to ask for how to how to like think about the problem in the correct way. You got to ask for examples. You got to ask for constraints. So it really is a back and forth thing, and it's not like the process is very it can't, like, learning can't be this rigid thing. It has to be organic. It has to be everyone's coming with different backgrounds, different experiences. um, and I think like just the fact that there's like so many different ways that people have or can learn programming these days, it can be challenging for Outco like instructors or anyone to kind of like meet people where they're at, figure out like what they know and like how they go about problem solving. But again, like being in that environment, I think Outco's kind of just figured out a formula to condense stuff into like as short of time frame as possible. And I know that was a challenge for me working there, was trying to cram as much material, but also like not overwhelm people, right? Because you can't just, at a certain point, you can't just keep throwing more and more. You got to make sure that the material sticks. So kind of a long-winded way of saying, talking a little bit about my experiences, but definitely very gratifying. And I think it's not, I think of all the programs I've kind of seen, this is like the best hands-on one, definitely out there.
Definitely. Thank you for that. And yeah, if you folks are interested in learning more about Outco, I'm gonna go ahead and post a poll in the chat room right now, to see which days work for you, so you can learn more. All right. Um, so yeah, let's get back to it. Now, Sergey, we're talking about finding the right community. We're talking about how to learn, the things that you did to learn, of course, teaching. But of course, the first thing we have to do is get in the right mindset, right? We have to get in the mindset of challenging ourselves. We have to get in the mindset of, hey, we have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable, right?
Mhm.
Um, so, how did you adopt the right mindset as, as growing as an engineer, you know, taking on challenges that you've never done before, things of that nature. So, yeah, what did you do?
Yeah, it's a big part of it, right? Like the having a good mindset in anything, right? Like having a good attitude is key, right? I think some of the most challenging students while I was instructor at Outco were students that had it wasn't even that it wasn't their programming skills so much as it was their mindset, right? Either they didn't really believe that they could do it, or they would kind of get down on themselves, or they sometimes would get defensive. Those are all things that really like work against you. It's a big drag. It's more so than any kind of like idea we might have about natural ability or education or whatever it might be. The attitude is probably the biggest thing that can make or break your experience at Outco, and make or break your interview process. And if you have the right attitude, it cuts down the time, helps you get a better job, helps you get more offers potentially. So I think that's just totally key. For me, if I had to sum it up into one mindset or attitude, and I would say it's just having a mindset of sort of curiosity. Um, when you're out coding and when you're trying to solve new problems, the best mindset I found is one where I'm sort of exploring and I'm playing with the problem. I'm completely 100% focused on the problem at hand, right? So it's being fully immersed in what I'm doing. The rewarding thing about coding, but also the challenging thing about coding is that to me, I and maybe this is just my own experience, but I have to be fully immersed in what I'm doing. It has to be complete 100% focus. And it's rewarding because it's kind of like solving a puzzle or playing a video game or, just being really absorbed in a book or a movie or something. But it also means that if there's a lot going on and, if you got a lot of stuff on your mind, like if you have bills to pay or if you're stressed about an upcoming interview or something, it can really derail your learning process and cut down on its effectiveness. So, and two, like I would say, like it's not, it is a mindset, right? And there's a certain degree of control that we all have over that. But it's not, at least for me personally, isn't something I can just turn on and off, right? It's not just like, oh, I'm going to be present now and totally focused. Sometimes it takes a little while to get into the rhythm. But one problem to getting into that rhythm I consistently face is feeling scattered. Feel free to post in the chat if you have trouble kind of like feeling scattered, maybe you know what I'm talking about. But I think a lot of times it's like there's a million distractions. I mean, I think it's everyone has a smartphone these days. Everyone's got a million things going off. It's Facebook, it's Instagram, it's text, it's calls, emails, and it really like to me, it's too much context switching. It's too much, it's too much information overload, and it's not all very useful. I mean, a lot of it's just kind of like junk food information, right? And so the solution I've kind of found to that, and it's fairly recent. I mean, it's only in the past probably year, and I think it's partially been a product of the coronavirus. Because now we have all this time to kind of reflect and try things. But, whatever your opinions might be about meditation, to me, it's really about like just sitting quietly for a few minutes. And this could be 5, 10, 15, or if you have the time up to like, I do up to 40 minutes sometimes. Sometimes I'll put on it's usually like some quiet music and like a timer and basically just sitting there and doing nothing. It sounds easy, but I struggle with it sometimes too when I have a lot going on because it feels like a waste of time, right? But I think there's something to be said about defragging your mind and sort of just like addressing the noise. Like if there's a million things popping into your head that are sort of out of your control right now, like this, for me, it helps me kind of drown that out and sort of get focused on like, what do I need to do over the next day. Like, what are the key points? Like, recently it was getting my taxes filed. Like, it's responding to a certain email, or preparing for a particular meeting or something, or getting a certain piece of code submitted. It's figuring out how to focus on what's important. So a little bit of quiet, a little bit of peace, a little bit of like downtime is great for that. And again, like 5-10 minutes, I even see the benefits there. Going on walks too, that helps. Workouts, it's about that, like what I mentioned earlier, taking care of yourself. And there's a good quote to go with this. I forget who it's by, but it might have been Abraham Lincoln. It was, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. Right. So this is essentially that, but for context and programming.
Definitely. Yeah, and I would love to add to that. You're talking about taking care of your body, taking care of yourself, and yeah, having been in the military, right? A lot of it is about taking care of your body. Your mind and your body are connected. So, if your body's not right, your mind's not going to be right, So a lot of it is just taking time to stretch, make sure you're feeling good, eating right, eating proper, getting the proper amount of sleep. Because if you're not sleeping, you're not going to be able to think straight. So definitely, you know. So Sergey, I got a question from Josh. What he's asking is, have we ever seen people at Outco, needing to go back through? One of my biggest pieces of advice for that is I always recommend folks to constantly doing, these data structure algorithm problems. Even just doing one a day. Do you agree with doing one a day, or what approach do you think is what approach do you think would be beneficial for you not to have to go through the program again?
Yeah, I mean, I can dig this up. I have it somewhere on GitHub, but I have like a repo that's just for these coding problems. And as I like seen them, lately I haven't done as many, but even after I left Outco, I kept contributing and adding problems to there. I think one a day is a great mark to hit. It's definitely reasonable. I think it's tricky because I've set goals for myself or New Year's resolutions where I'm like, I'm going to write every day, or I'm going to do a coding problem or something every day, or every week I have some target to hit. I think it's good to track those things, but I also know that sometimes it can be tough to comply, and it creates just additional stress and sort of overhead. I saw a good video recently by a guy named CGP Grey about creating a theme. So if you have a theme for a month or a quarter or a week for saying I'm going to do focus on recursion, right? And then that way I'm going to focus on I'm going to focus on a month of React or something, or whatever it might be. That works too. Like, I think if you just kind of keep that in the back of your mind, it's simple, it's sort of vague, but it gives you that opportunity to say, okay, like whenever you're trying to figure out what you want to do, because a lot of times it can be just taxing to figure out what problem do I need to solve today? Like what would be the right thing to focus on? If you have that theme in the back of your mind, it helps you kind of direct and say, okay, I'm going to look up a problem, like a graph problem today, or I'm going to look at this graph database framework or something. I think that would be kind of like my piece of advice there.
Definitely. Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that. So when you were going through Google, right, or when you were applying, and this is a question from Nivea, right? How did you decide which path you wanted to go with software engineering, right? Did you gravitate towards one? Did you just, just throw something on the wall, see which one what stuck? How did you decide what software engineering you liked?
This is specifically in the context of Google.
Yeah, Google. Let's go with Google.
This is Nidhi's question.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, just wanted to make sure I was reading it. Yeah. Yeah, I think that one, it's tricky because I think the individual team matters a little more than the ladder itself. I think like the way Google interviews is usually pretty, or at least my experience was it's pretty vague, and they kind of assign the team to you afterwards. For some companies where you're interviewing for a particular role, And so they ask questions around that role a little more. I would just say like get a feel for um, the team that you're going to kind of be a part of, and ask people on that team what what their experience has been like. Do they like their managers? Do they like the workload? That type of thing, because it's that affects your day to day, I think, a lot more. But again, like most of the interviews are pretty standard. A lot of coding questions, data structures, algorithms, basically the stuff that the Outco teaches. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for answering that. So, I asked those, the questions that I had. I would love to open it up to the chat, to open it up to Q&A. If you'd be open to that, Sergey.
Yeah, let's do it.
Wonderful. Yeah, so let's open up to Q&A. So feel free, type out questions you have in the chat room. We'll love to answer any questions. I know we had questions about Outco. So of course you could ask Sergey about how his transition was from teaching to that, to Google, to being an engineer full time. How he balances that, how he balance. Well, of course we know meditation is one big thing, taking care of yourself, right? So yeah, I know Karthik over is asking, is coding skills mandatory for Google? If you, Sergey, if you can see that in the Q&A.
Yeah, good question. I mean, there's a lot of people I work with who are non-coders. I kind of sit in in between a lot of like technical and non-technical teams. It's definitely not a requirement for most folks. I'd say most of them kind of have some understanding of generally like how stuff works. There's product manager roles, there's product operation manager roles, there's PGM, program manager, a lot of manager roles, and then there's business development. There's a lot of non-coding folks at Google. So it's really about like what kind of role you want to get into. I'm not as familiar with what that interview process is like. I know there's some level of behavioral questions, because everyone has to go through those, just kind of culture fit, making sure you're able to talk about your past experiences and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's definitely not a requirement. I don't know, but I don't know too much about them. Again, I'm probably not the best person to ask, but I would say best bet is look up some folks on LinkedIn who work at the companies you're interested in, and just grab some time from them. Ask if do a little bit of research, see kind of what they work on. If it seems interesting, reach out and just kind of pick their brain and ask if they'd be open to a call or something.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that, Sergey. So, Praveen's asking, and I could definitely give some input on this too. What strategies for preparation of code reviews? Most of the answers I look at after spending some time or taking hours. Yeah. So, one thing that I realized before I attended Outco is I would go on LeetCode, start on a problem, wouldn't understand it, so I would go look at the answer. The problem that I faced when I did that was I didn't really know what I was looking at, to be honest. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of answers. They're all doing something differently. They all have different time and space complexity. Everyone has their own methods that they prefer. Everyone has their own style. I would actually equate, coding to almost art, right? You could do the same, you could draw, you could paint the same painting, but everyone has a different method of doing it, right? And that's the same thing with coding. Everyone has a different way of answering these questions. So once I joined Outco, what I realized very quickly is my foundation was lacking, right? And even going on to the harder problems, right? I realized as long as my foundation was solid, I could just fall back on my foundation and I would be able to answer these types of questions. So what I would recommend for preparation of code reviews and just, answering these questions better, have a solid foundation. If there's holes or cracks in your foundation, that's where we're going to start failing a little bit. So Sergey, could you add to that, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think just kind of echoing what I said earlier is, if you don't understand a problem, try to teach it to someone. I think part of the reason I started also the Medium blog was to A, to get better myself, and I enjoyed the writing, but B is finding better ways to teach some of these problems. Because a lot of times I would read an answer on LeetCode or what's the other one, Geeks for Geeks, and it wasn't always clear. I mean, it's a great resource, and a lot of times you can get good solutions, good answers out of it. You can try to rewrite the code. I wouldn't say it's a total waste of time to just look at the answers. It doesn't make sense to bang your head against the wall for hours on end trying to solve a problem. At a certain point, you do have to kind of look at the answer, but spend some time with it. I would say prioritize depth over breadth. And this is why it's tricky to set a certain goal of like, I want to solve 10 questions a day. It's better to understand one really well, because that one is going to, if you really understand that one, it's going to propel you a lot further and help you understand the deeper principles, because you're going to have questions, you're going to have to answer those questions yourself. And like I said, it's a good bet to try teaching someone, because again, when you're in that process of communicating, figuring out how do I convey this topic to someone, you're sort of digesting it and mulling it over and playing with the idea and looking at it from different angles. And then again, like if you can teach it to someone, you can solve it in an interview. So that's why it's so important to like have that partner, all that pair programming. On top of the community and all that, it's too. I found that it's a better way to stay. For me, when I'm like pair programming, or if I'm working on a problem with someone else, the time just goes by faster. Like it's having like a workout buddy. To me, it's like I'm more effective that way, and I'm just more engaged and kind of just like working on things, and you get to kind of pick up through osmosis how someone might look at a problem differently. You kind of help fill in fill in the gaps for each other. So again, it's challenging now because we can't see each other in person, but Zoom is a great resource, and there's breakout rooms, all kinds of ways to do it digitally.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I'd like to address Maria's question, which is in the chat room. As a front-end engineer, my day job doesn't really involve algorithms and data structures. However, the interview questions almost always involve algorithms. If I want to be a successful engineer, do I focus my learning on training for the interview or for the actual job? This is a wonderful question. So the way I like to personally break it down, and Sergey, I love your input on this as well. I feel like there's two different types of coding, right? There's your day-to-day, and then there's your interview coding, right? So I also was a front-end engineer. I focus on React. Love that framework. Now, yes, during the interview process, I noticed there was a lot of algorithms and data structures. However, day-to-day, I'm not using dynamic programming or recursion, right? So one thing is there has to be a good balance of the two, right? Because you're doing your job, you're able to practice your actual job skill set, right? So I would say on your off time, I would recommend focusing on that interview, right? Focusing on those whiteboarding skills and reiterating everything Sergey just said, right? Focus on the depth, right? Getting really good at one thing, and then of course, then that's going to propel you a lot further. So that's what I would recommend. Sergey, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, sorry, could you reiterate the question? I was looking for it, but I can.
Yeah, so it's in chat. So basically, if Maria is a front-end engineer, and basically she's asking if she wants to be a successful engineer, does she focus on learning the interview skill set or the actual job?
Sure. It's a tricky one. I think it depends on the role. If you're going through these bigger companies, I think they have a pretty standard, like they're going to ask you some sort of algorithm problem. But a lot of startups won't, because it's not necessarily the best way to screen someone. Big companies, it's just slower to change processes. I mean, I can speak to that just through my experience at Google. Change is slow. It doesn't hurt. I'd say, like, I always found the CS fundamental stuff interesting, and I thought it kind of enhanced my knowledge and my ability to solve work problems. Again, I don't really do dynamic programming stuff, but just knowing, knowing things about, properties of graphs, it helps for things like, if you're dealing with some kind of network effect, or if you're dealing with something, or if you're dealing with a directory structure, knowing that that's like a tree-like structure, and certain things I think are helpful. I'd say it's tricky in interviews because again, it depends on the kind of interview. Sometimes you'll have a project. If you're a front end engineer, like they'll say, build this front end for a mock app or something. And then if you have if you have like a bigger company, it might be algorithm problems. So it never hurts to have the extra tools in your tool belt, but focus on one thing at a time. I don't think it makes sense to context switch and try to do everything all in one day. I'd say focus on one thing per day, and that's kind of what I was mentioning earlier about themes. So spend a week on a certain theme and then kind of move on. It doesn't serve you to context switch.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. A
Yeah.
couple questions in the Q&A specifically related to Google, right? Vivian's asking, what was the process for interviewing like at Google? As how many times were you interviewed? And what type of questions did they ask related to leak code challenges, easy, medium, hard? Also,
Mhm.
did you know what the team you were interviewing for before you interviewed, or did they tell you after you interviewed?
Sure. Yeah, so I knew I was coming in for like the shopping team. So we're dealing with some e-commerce stuff. The interview questions were probably I'd say like leak code medium, maybe a couple hard questions. Usually they would do 2 questions per sort of rotation. First one would be like an easy question, kind of as a warm up. But keep in mind, you only have about 45 minutes to solve these, and that's minus the intros and outros. So they really can't ask you too many challenging questions. They're going to say re-implement Dijkstra's algorithm or something crazy, right? So those are kind of the kinds of questions. I also had a few like SQL questions and sort of data modeling questions. So you have sort of an e-commerce platform, what kind of tables you have, that sort of thing. And then I'd say so as far as the team, I kind of got moved around after I got the offer. So again, it's flexible. A lot of times people transfer. I mean, like a lot of my teammates have sort of, as in the year and change that I've been at Google, my teams have changed a lot. Like a lot of people have come and gone. A lot of people are on leave. So people move around a lot. It's pretty great in terms of like having that flexibility.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that.
Sure.
All righty. So we have one from Malcolm. Which part of the technical interview is the most anxiety provoking for you, and how do you manage the anxiety? Malcolm, that's a wonderful question. So as I was mentioning earlier on, right, when I get flustered, I go downhill real fast. It's not even funny how fast I go downhill. So for me personally, it was a whiteboarding, right? And as I mentioned, that first interview I had, I just froze, right? I saw the whiteboard and I thought it was just the ocean. I was like, I got lost, right? So what I realized for me, what helps the most is just having the knowledge, right? I find comfort in knowledge and knowing how to do things. So what I did was, and that's what I worked on with the Outco coach, right? They jumped on a call with me, and we were just going through just making sure I knew things, right? The coach would challenge me and ask me like, hey, what do you do? Like, how do you do this? How do you do that? And if I didn't know, went and spent a bunch of time learning that and solidifying it, right? Not just like breezing through an article of like, oh, this is how I do it. I truly got understanding and gained that knowledge. So there's a few things also. When you're talking, right? This is one trick that I like to use. A lot of people, when they get anxious or nervous, they start talking faster, right? If you're familiar with a musical instrument, they go through, they have that pattern of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Tap your foot to that. If you tap your foot to 1, 2, 3, 4, right, and you constantly do that and you talk to that beat, you're never going to get out of beat, right? So even if you get anxious, well, you're still going to be talking to that same beat. Another trick is controlling your breathing, right? Controlling your breathing and looking at one fixed point. So obviously looking at a person, people get nervous looking eye to eye, right? Look at right in the center, you're totally fine. They're not going to know. That's one fixed point, and you can kind of like zone out with your vision. I do this all the time just because sometimes I do get nervous during conversation. But I make sure to control my breathing. By controlling your breathing, and this kind of goes to Sergey talking about meditation, because meditation, you have to control your breathing. You have to, you, you feel yourself, like you feel every part of your body, right? So controlling your breathing is very important. So keeping that breathing under control, talking in that smooth manner. I think those are the ways that I personally manage my anxiety, and just having that knowledge. Sergey, would you care to add to that?
Sure. I mean, I think for me, it's those are all great advice, by the way. I'd say for me, it's probably just the prep or the kind of anxiety leading up to it. Once I'm there, it usually I just kind of get into the rhythm, and sort of it's like whatever happens happens. Sure, and I know the feeling. I've definitely frozen up, and this is even before sort of coding interviews. I've had projects where I had to present something, and I kind of just got this. You can look it up if you're not familiar. It's called like an amygdala hijack, and it's basically where you freeze up and you kind of go into this like panic, fight or flight mode, it's fight, flight, or freeze, and so it's kind of I guess more like a freeze or like panic kind of reaction. It sucks. It's probably one of the most horrible feelings, but it's that. I mean, it's a feeling, and it's a bit of trial by fire. I mean, you look back on things and they seem small. I'd say like I guess like a trick to kind of avoid it. I mean, obviously like preparation, but I'd say in the moment, anytime you get stuck on a problem, it can trigger that, and I think that's also more likely if you don't have preparation, right? So if you've gone through Outco, just by being up on the whiteboard, even in like a fake environment, your brain sort of gets trained on that environment where there are no stakes, and then it translates that over to a whiteboarding environment on an on-site, right? So like you've just been up there that many times that you're gonna feel more comfortable. So there's a few tricks you can do. You can ask more questions, just try more examples. I talked about that in one of the blog posts on the Medium sites. If you want more details on that, those are some good tips, I'd say. But I even have this, but I think to stress like it's more, I focus more on like the process of problem solving, right? So like I said, there's an attitude you have of like curiosity, trying things and going through examples and asking questions, making it back and forth, interactive, not knowing how to like get unstuck, right? Like knowing how to troubleshoot and try things. Like that's a really valuable skill on the job and off the job, right? Because if you say like, okay, I'm just going to run this script, oh, it's broken. Well, you're not going to be very useful at your job, right? Like you need to figure out, okay, well, why did that break? Okay, someone made a change over here that then broke this, that whatever. You need this like kind of detective attitude. And I've even had this idea for a session, for like Outco students that it's to give them an unsolvable problem, right? So it's a problem that mathematicians, scientists haven't actually found a solution for, but it's one that you can actually understand and you can kind of start to work through. So it's not, just to kind of show that it's not about coming up with the right answer. It's about really like the process of getting there. Because the reality is like, you can do as many problems as you want. Still no guarantee that you're going to pass every interview 100% of the time. But you don't need to know every single question. You just need to know, enough to get a job or get an offer or a couple offers, right? So.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
All righty. So Nitin has a question at the top of the Q&A. So if we have some experience in multiple fields of software engineering, not an expert in one, how does a company like Google assess you and get you to a team? And is that we have to worry about if we are not really good at one thing?
Yeah, so my general experience, unless they're hiring for a specific role, it's they hire like in a general role kind of sense. So I'd focus on the algorithm questions. They'll see kind of like what your languages are and try to place you. Usually they're a recruiter's hiring for a specific role, but again, it comes down to general sort of algorithm data structure coding questions. So just prepare for those. Yeah.
Wonderful. Christopher's asking some advice for someone going through a full stack development course after school has ended. Yeah, so for me personally, what I would always do, especially when I was teaching my students inside prison, right? And of course, some of them got released and now they're working in tech. What I told them, and I actually gave them the option. I was like, hey, do you want to, and of course I'm using the front end, or I did teach them full stack, but focusing on the front end side of things. I was like, hey, do you want to go with Angular or React? And then I explained the pros and cons. I looked at the amount of jobs in both areas. And the reason why I looked at the amount of jobs is because they're coming out of prison, right? I wanted to give them every possible chance that they had to get employment. So, some of my top students, we brainstormed of like, hey, Angular's good at these things, React's good at these things. Ultimately, we went with React. The reason why we went with that, so to answer your question more specifically, what I personally would focus on is where the jobs are at, right? What's more valuable at this point in time, right? Obviously, tech is always changing. It's constantly changing. It's constantly evolving. One day, React is the hot new thing, and then hey, maybe the next iteration of it, it's going to drop it, and then Angular is going to come back and be the hot thing, right? So I focus on what has the most jobs, what has the most likelihood. I'm not going to focus on things of that that aren't that in demand, just because it's not going to be beneficial. And of course, you have to enjoy it. Me personally, I started with Angular. I started with a mean stack, and I realized I just didn't enjoy Angular at all, right? And I got over to the MERN stack, and I was like, this is way more fun, right? So I actually started having fun with it. And just by having fun with it, I started learning more. So, Sergey, do you have any advice for full stack development? Like going through a full stack, what would you focus on? What do you recommend?
Sure. I'm assuming this is full
Christopher?
stack.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So so I went through a program called Maker Square, which then got acquired by Hack Reactor, which now got acquired by Galvanize. So big fish eat the little fish. But I'd say that one was if you're asking specifically about the like sort of intensive like boot camp like full time. Similar advice as before, like create the right systems and support structure for yourself. It's very intense to be like doing this coding stuff all day, every day. But if you're just going through something after college, I'd say like try to put in like just always think of it in terms of taking like the next step, right? If you're unfamiliar completely with JavaScript, take like a Code Academy course, something you can do in an afternoon or a week or something, depending on your coding background. Take like the minimum kind of like next step and then see if you want to keep going, right? So you're not over investing and into something that you may or may not like. And then in terms of like the technologies, I'd say like, kind of echoing what Shiv said, it's hard to go wrong. A lot of times like the knowledge is sort of transferable. A big part of coding or being an engineer is just being able to learn on the job and on the spot. So, I'd say, don't overthink that. I'd say just like figure out how to kind of get those right systems in place.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. So Praveen is asking, in an interview, it is expected to know solution. Otherwise, I don't see it can be completed in 30 minutes, leaving 15 minutes intros and outros, including problem description. What do you say to that, Sergey? Do you think you have to already know the solution? And I would like to actually add to that. One thing that I learned is it's all about patterns. With all these data structures, there's patterns. Being able to identify. It's impossible to know every single problem, right? And what's important is being able to quickly identify the pattern. And for me personally, what I would do, I'm a very visual individual, so I would spend a lot more time diagramming. if I only had 30 minutes to solve a problem, I'd probably spend 15 minutes of it diagramming, and then 10 minutes to pseudocode it, and then just 5 minutes to write it out, because all my work has already been done in the diagram and in the pseudocode. What do you say to that, Sergey?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you've seen a problem before, it definitely helps. I mean, I had one set of interviews where each interviewer basically asked a variation of the exact same problem. Each one asked two problems, but the first problem was like identical all three times, which was odd. But anyways, so as far as knowing it, I think again, like, it focus on um, you'd be surprised at how good you can get at solving these problems on the spot during time constraints. It is a skill that you can learn. Sometimes it seems like like it's an impossible thing, but it's really not. Once you've seen enough problems, you start to realize like there's only certain kinds that get asked over and over. Again, it has to be something that they ask questions that someone can solve, and it's, I think, the nice thing about Outco is like it's covered like distilled all the noise and said, okay, these are the skills that you need to focus on for solving these kinds of problems. So yeah, again, you're not going to figure out every problem, right? Like there's going to be times where you get stuck, or maybe you're supposed to solve two problems, you can only get through one given your time, and that's just the way it goes. But again, if you focus on the process of it and asking questions, diagramming, like Shiv said, trying more examples. I can't stress that enough. Like, people don't try enough examples when they work through problems. Like, if you get stuck, just keep going. And sometimes, like, when you actually get to the code section, if you've done the practice and you've done the work ahead of time, like, you can get through the code like very quickly. So sometimes, like, that problem solving piece might take up like 90% of the time, and then in 5 minutes you can quickly write out the code. They want to see that process. They want to see you talk through and think through that question.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I can't emphasize enough, communication is extremely important, right? Being able to talk about what you're doing, because you could get the problem right, but if you didn't communicate, right, it doesn't mean it's hard to know how you're going to communicate in a stressful environment. So we have about 3 minutes. I think this might be the last question. So let's go with, so Josh is asking, at Google or anywhere, how do you recommend moving into a different field of software engineering?
Good question. I'm actually, interested in machine learning myself. I think it's one of those things where, I kind of realized like I can't just like dabble in it. Like, you have to make like a commitment to kind of move somewhere. So when I first got into coding, right, it was at a certain point I had to like say, okay, am I going to be serious about this and like go full force into it, or do I kind of just let it go? Because it's one thing to take some online courses and just mess around with some toy apps. It's another to like fully commit and actually say I'm going to do this thing. So make that decision. And then like network with the right people. There's a lot of teams, right? Like a lot of people work on different things. Get to like reach out to people at Google. We have like an internal directory where you can kind of find what different people are working on. Talk to them. It's also a little different than like on the outside kind of job search, because everyone's already working for Google. So it's it's a little bit nicer just kind of network and get to know, kind of see like who's hiring, like who's available, what teams are growing. Like I said, it's a process and it's an investment. So, but yeah, if you're interested in that, I mean, there's also, and again, nowadays everything's online. All universities are going online anyways, and then there's all these online courses that are free that are just as good. So if you really want to learn a skill, like the information's out there.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Sergey, I do think that was the last question. So I just want to go ahead and thank, Sergey, you for taking the time to speak with us. Speak to me, speak to every participant that came in here. I hope everyone was able to learn something, take something away. To everyone that joined, thank you all for your time. Definitely appreciate you, right? Definitely want to be safe out there. So Sergey, do you have any closing remarks?
Stay hungry, stay foolish.
Wonderful. Alrighty, y'all. You all take care. Enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week. Of course, you welcome everyone. You welcome.
Thanks, everyone.